Hello, my name is Emily Hart, and I'm 25 years old. I grew up in a lively household in Chicago, surrounded by my three cousins who always seemed to view my ambitions with a mixture of skepticism and amusement. Ever since I graduated from Northwestern with a degree in marketing, I've been determined to prove that my creative ideas and work ethic can pay off in big ways. But whenever I pitched my latest venture or shared news about my achievements, their reactions were almost predictable. They'd roll their eyes, exchange knowing glances, and mutter under their breath that I was dreaming too big. Last month, I made the bold decision to sponsor our family's annual summer gala, an event hosted by our aunt and uncle to celebrate the coming season with a black tie charity fundraiser. I could sense my cousin's doubt when I casually mentioned the word sponsorship over brunch at our grandmother's kitchen table. Now, standing outside the elegant ballroom venue clad in its ivory drapery and soft golden lighting, I felt a flutter of nervous excitement. This was my chance to demonstrate that I wasn't just another 20-something with lofty dreams. It was time to step onto the stage I had helped bring to life and let my work speak for itself. Over the past 2 years, I've poured nearly every extra penny from my job at a boutique advertising agency into savings. I refused to lease an expensive downtown apartment and instead chose a modest studio in Logan Square to ensure I could allocate funds toward my passion projects. When Aunt Margaret asked if anyone would be interested in underwriting the cost of live music, floral arrangements, and catering for the gala, I saw an opportunity to combine my financial discipline with my marketing expertise. I drafted a detailed proposal complete with projected donor engagement, social media coverage plans, and a breakdown of expected returns in goodwill and community recognition. My cousins Jake, Sophie, and Leah listened to my presentation with polite nods, but I noticed Sophie stifling a snort, while Jake tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. "You're doing what?" Leah finally asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Despite their mockery, I felt an undercurrent of pride. This sponsorship wasn't just about my name on a program. It was about showing my family that I could turn strategy into tangible results. And as the date of the gala approached, I prepared every detail meticulously, determined to prove that their doubts were misplaced. The day of the gala arrived on a warm June evening, the sky a canvas of indigo fading to violet as twilight settled over Chicago. I slipped into a sleek navy sheath dress that hugged my figure in all the right places, paired with understated pearl earrings that had belonged to my late grandmother. With my heart pounding, I navigated the grand lobby, admiring the towering floral columns and the soft glow of lanterns lining the walkway. As I passed the registration table staffed by eager volunteers, I overheard whispers. Wasn't she the one who funded the chrysanthemum displays? She's so young yet. Her name's front and center on the ticket. My pulse quickened with a mix of pride and anticipation. Somewhere in the crowd, my cousins were probably comparing designer shoes and critiquing hors d'oeuvres choices, but I refused to let their cynicism dim my excitement. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that this evening was about more than appearances. It was about community, impact, and the culmination of months of dedication. Each detail, from the playlist curated by local jazz musicians to the thoughtfully arranged photo booths, reflected my vision and my willingness to go the extra mile for an event of this scale. Shortly after the opening remarks by Aunt Margaret, the spotlight shifted to me. I was seated at a reserved table adorned with a custom nameplate that read "Main Sponsor, Emily Hart." My cousins, who had been lounging nearby with barely concealed smirks, looked up in unison. Their eyes widened in genuine surprise, a rare expression of acknowledgement. The event host, a family friend named Julian, cleared his throat at the microphone and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we owe our deepest gratitude to our main sponsor, Emily Hart, whose generosity and vision have transformed tonight's gala into an unforgettable experience." A swell of applause echoed through the ballroom. I felt my cheeks flush as I rose to accept their appreciation, wavering for just a moment under the intensity of their gaze. As I sat back down, I caught Sophie discreetly wiping a speck of astonishment from her eyelashes, while Jake gave me a subtle thumbs up. My heart swelled with a blend of vindication and warmth. In that moment, I realized that validation from my peers could be as impactful as any metric on a report. When the jazz quartet launched into their opening tune, I clapped along enthusiastically, fully present in the glow of a hard-earned victory. Yet, beneath the surface of this triumph, I couldn't ignore a soft pang of nervousness. The event was far from over, and the real test would come when the fundraiser results were tallied. Every donation slip, every auction bid, held the potential to affirm or undermine my efforts. As I watched guests congregate around the raffle tables, I found my cousins gravitating toward me with genuine smiles, a stark contrast to their earlier jaded demeanor. Sophie asked probing questions about my marketing strategy, while Jake seemed curious about the logistics of orchestrating such a large-scale affair. Leah admitted she had underestimated the amount of work that went into planning every aspect, from menu selection to seating charts. Their newfound interest warmed me, but I reminded myself to stay focused. Tonight wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about making a difference for the charities we championed. I straightened my posture, ready to dive into the conversations, negotiations, and behind-the-scenes moments that would ultimately determine the evening's success. Little did I know, the most challenging obstacle of the night was still waiting in the wings, poised to test not only my skills but my resolve in front of an audience that now saw me in a completely different light. As the last champagne flute was raised and the soft hum of conversation filled the grand hall, I found myself reflecting on the journey that led me to this moment. Sponsors and guests mingled under the crystal chandeliers, unaware of the quiet determination fueling every decision I made. Little did I expect that the real surprise of the evening would arrive just beyond the raised stage, waiting to challenge everything I thought I knew. I hadn't quite processed the hush that fell over the room when the jazz quartet paused between numbers, but I sensed a shift in the air. From my vantage point near the head table, I watched as a silver-haired man in a tailored charcoal suit approached the stage. He wasn't on the guest list I'd reviewed. In fact, I barely recognized him. Yet the murmurs around me identified him instantly. Martin Caldwell, the philanthropic entrepreneur whose foundation had funded some of Chicago's most ambitious community projects. His reputation was formidable. He was both generous and exacting, known to withdraw support if he didn't see clear, measurable impact. My heart thudded against my ribs. This was the moment I'd dreamed of and the moment I could falter spectacularly. The host, Julian, noticed the attention and signaled the sound technician. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly into the mic, "we have a surprise guest who wishes to say a few words." Applause rippled through the hall, and all eyes turned to Caldwell as he stepped up to the podium. My stomach tightened. I'd prepared remarks for the gala itself, but nothing had readied me for an impromptu appearance by one of the city's most scrutinizing benefactors. Would he look me in the eye and see my youth as an experience? Would he challenge my claim that this gala could genuinely enrich our local charities? Caldwell cleared his throat and began speaking about the importance of supporting grassroots initiatives, praising Aunt Margaret's decades-long dedication to the cause. Then, almost casually, he pivoted. "I understand our main sponsor, Miss Emily Hart, has poured heart and soul and considerable resources into tonight's success. I'd like to hear from her directly. What does community engagement mean to you, Miss Hart?" A hush fell. My cousin's expressions morphed into open surprise. Even Aunt Margaret leaned forward, eyebrows raised. All that preparation, all those spreadsheets and marketing plans. I'd never practiced an extemporaneous speech in front of this caliber of judge. I swallowed hard, then rose from my seat. My dress felt suddenly heavier as I approached the podium, each step echoing against the polished floor. I steadied my voice. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for your kind words and for all the incredible work your foundation has done in our city. To me, community engagement is about more than fundraising. It's about listening, collaborating, and creating experiences where every guest feels personally invested in the cause. Tonight isn't just a gala, it's an opportunity for neighbors to connect with the stories behind these charities, to see firsthand how their contributions can transform lives." I glanced down at the program but spoke mostly from the heart, recalling families helped by our scholarship initiative and the elderly couple whose home had received much-needed repairs. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders as genuine passion replaced nerves. Caldwell nodded appreciatively, his steely gaze softening. An inspiring perspective, he said, handing the mic back to Julian. I look forward to reviewing the outcomes of this event. The room erupted into applause once more, this time with a palpable note of respect. I retreated to my seat, trembling but exhilarated. Jake, Sophie, and Leah exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism now replaced with something like admiration. My chest swelled, but I reminded myself, the speech was one thing, the data would be another. We still had live auction items to bid on, raffle tickets to sell, and pledge forms to fill out. The real proof lay in the numbers. Moments later, the room dimmed and spotlights illuminated the main auction table, where a series of unique experiences, everything from a private dinner prepared by a renowned chef to front row seats at a Bulls game, were ready for bids. I slipped away briefly to check on the volunteers. Donation totals were promising, but not yet at the level I'd projected. I returned to the crowd just as the auctioneer's gavel came down. The first bids trickled in hesitantly. I held my breath, urging my marketing instincts to kick in. I knew timing would be critical. Momentum in an auction often snowballs when excitement builds at the right moment. I caught Sophie's eye. She'd previously mocked every detail, but now she leaned forward, scanning the room. Understanding flickered across her face, and she whispered to Leah, who moved to stand beside her. Suddenly, as the chef's dinner package was being presented, Sophie called out, "I'll start things off at 2,000. Heads whipped around. Leah, emboldened, bid 2,500. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow and paced his gavel. The room lit up with renewed energy. Guests murmured among themselves, inspired by the momentum. I dared to smile, realizing that my cousins had become allies in this crucial moment. Their earlier derision transformed into enthusiastic participation. As paddle numbers rose and descended, the thermometer on the projection screen climbed steadily. My heart thundered in time with each hammer strike. Behind me, Caldwell watched impassively, his lips curving into a faint smile. This was exactly the type of community engagement I'd envisioned. Neighbors united in friendly competition, all for a good cause. By the time the last item closed at an impressive $10,000, the room buzzed with triumph. I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder, and Margaret, her eyes misty. "You did it, Emily," she whispered, and I realized that beyond my cousin's newfound respect, I'd earned my family matriarch's pride, yet the night's crescendo wasn't over. As guests mingled with cocktails, Julian invited me back to the podium to share preliminary results. I took a deep breath and announced that, thanks to the auction, raffle, and direct donations, we'd already surpassed our initial goal by 15%, and that final tallies would likely push us even higher once online contributions were added. Applause rippled out, and Caldwell stepped forward again, extending his hand. "Miss Hart," he said, "I'd like to discuss extending my foundation's matching grant of $50,000 to fully support next year's initiatives, provided you oversee the program rollout." My breath caught. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. A major endorsement, a challenge to scale my efforts, and an affirmation that even under exacting scrutiny, I'd proven my capacity to lead. As I shook his hand, I felt a collision of exhilaration and apprehension. This pledge could catapult my career, but it also meant shouldering far greater responsibility. My cousins clustered around me, their earlier skepticism now replaced by genuine excitement for what lay ahead. Aunt Margaret beamed as she squeezed my arm. In that charged moment, under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, I realized that the real surprise of the evening wasn't just Caldwell's unexpected support, it was the recognition that I'd moved from proving myself within my family bubble to stepping onto a much larger stage. The applause that followed felt different now, not just celebration, but an invitation to the next chapter of my journey. And as I looked across the room, at the smiling faces of supporters old and new, I knew that the hardest obstacles were still waiting, but so were the most rewarding victories. I woke the next morning to the Indiana sun pouring through my bedroom window, casting warm streaks across my modest Logan Square studio. My mind raced not with celebratory memories of last night's triumph, but with the weight of new responsibilities pressing in. Martin Caldwell's matching grant offer was thrilling, but it came with an unspoken expectation that I could deliver on an even grander scale. I lay in bed, running through schedules, budgets, and program outlines, feeling the familiar knot of excitement and anxiety tighten in my chest. By the time I rolled out of bed and brewed my first cup of coffee, I knew I needed a plan to turn Caldwell's conditional pledge into a sustainable reality. At the office, my team greeted me with congratulatory smiles and warm pats on the back. As I settled into my usual desk by the window, I pulled up the gala's final numbers. We had exceeded our goals by 18%. But Caldwell's foundation required quarterly impact reports, community surveys, and documented volunteer hours. I drafted an email to his assistant requesting the specific metrics and deadlines, then shifted to assembling a working group. I tapped Sophie to co-lead volunteer coordination, since she had proven herself adept at rallying energy during the auction. Jake agreed to head the logistics committee, curious about supply chains and venue negotiations. Leah, whose knack for empathy had shown when she listened to beneficiary families, volunteered to manage outreach and community feedback. Delegating tasks felt empowering, but I couldn't shake the undercurrent of doubt. Would our informal committee be enough to satisfy Caldwell's exacting standards? By midday, I convened our first strategy meeting in my agency's conference room, walls adorned with framed ad campaigns and whiteboards scrawled with client keywords. I passed around printed packets outlining our goals, launched 3 new scholarship programs, double participation in senior home repair days, and improved donor retention by 20%. We mapped timelines, identified potential stumbling blocks like event overlap and volunteer burnout, and brainstormed mitigation strategies. Sophie suggested instituting quarterly volunteer appreciation events to keep morale high. Jake proposed forging partnerships with local businesses for in-kind donations. Leah emphasized transparent storytelling to nurture donor relationships. As our ideas interwove, the anxiety in my stomach eased, replaced by the familiar thrill of building something meaningful from scratch. That evening, I met Aunt Margaret for dinner at her favorite Italian bistro. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes shining with pride. Over bruschetta and linguine, I outlined Caldwell's grant conditions and our internal structure. She listened intently, then tapped her fork against her plate. "You were brave last night," she said, voice soft. "But don't be afraid to ask for support beyond your cousins. There are community leaders who'd love to be part of this." Her words resonated. Aunt Margaret connected me with Pastor Ramirez, whose church had space for free workshops, and with Marisol, a nonprofit director eager to co-host neighborhood events. By the time dessert arrived, I had 2 new partnerships on the calendar and a renewed sense of confidence that I wasn't alone in this venture. Back at my studio apartment later that night, I spread maps across the floor, marking locations for summer outreach events. I noticed clusters of underserved blocks and potential volunteer pools near community centers. I drafted a survey to capture resident needs and hopes, tailoring questions to gauge interest in different programs. When I finally collapsed into bed, my head buzzed with logistic details and creative concepts. Sleep was elusive, but by dawn I'd already refined my survey and emailed it to Leah for review. Over the next week, our working group transformed from a casual committee into a well-oiled machine. Sophie secured t-shirts and snacks for volunteers. Jake negotiated discounted rates with equipment rental companies. Leah organized focus groups with neighborhood elders to refine our home repair protocols. I liaised with Caldwell's foundation, establishing a shared dashboard to track progress. Every small success, like finalizing our volunteer schedule or confirming the first scholarship recipient, felt like a victory. Yet each milestone also reminded me of the looming reporting deadlines and the potential for missteps under scrutiny. Midway through the month, I found myself standing in the backyard of Mrs. Nguyen, an elderly widow whose porch had rotted beyond safe use. Surrounded by half-assembled scaffolding and a team of eager volunteers sporting Emily Hart 2025 shirts, I felt the tangible impact of our efforts. As I hammered planks alongside a 13-year-old who said he wanted to join the Peace Corps. Someday, I realized that community engagement wasn't just a phrase, it was a living, breathing collaboration. Mrs. Nguyen's tearful gratitude fueled my resolve. Yet as gratitude washed over me, I also became aware of Caldwell's foundation director watching from the gate, clipboard in hand. I waved, forcing a confident smile, but inside I felt the familiar churn of nerves. This project was our first test under Caldwell's watchful eye, and any misstep could ripple through future funding. That evening, I compiled our first quarterly report, flanked by graphs illustrating volunteer hours, cost breakdowns, and beneficiary quotes. I wrote an executive summary emphasizing our focus on listening to community voices and adjusting programs accordingly. I included photos of repaired porches, scholarship award ceremonies, and volunteers celebrating over pizza. When I hit send, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. There was no instant reply, only the hum of my laptop spooling data into cyberspace. I couldn't control Caldwell's response, but I could own our transparency and dedication. A week later, I received a succinct email. The foundation approved our report and released the next tranche of matched funds. Relief rolled over me in waves, tinged with exhilaration. I immediately shared the news with Sophie, Jake, and Leah over a video call. Their cheers echoed through my apartment, their faces animated with pride and excitement. We celebrated with virtual high fives and promises to meet in person soon. In that moment, I realized our initial success had cemented not only Caldwell's trust but also the bond among my cousins and me. Their early skepticism had given way to genuine collaboration, and together we had demonstrated that a young woman with vision and a supportive team could orchestrate meaningful social change. As summer ripened into July, the momentum built. Our scholarship fund applications doubled, home repair crews scheduled work almost every weekend, and community events drew larger crowds than anticipated. Each milestone reinforced my belief that authentic engagement grounded in listening, partnership, and transparency was more powerful than any marketing campaign I could devise. Yet I also remained mindful of the horizon. Next quarter's report would be even more rigorous, and Caldwell's offer to expand into neighboring cities loomed as both opportunity and challenge. One evening, after a successful outdoor concert fundraiser under a canopy of string lights, I stood backstage with Caldwell himself. He offered a rare smile and congratulated me on exceeding our summer goals. Then he paused and asked, "So, Miss Hart, what's your vision for next year?" His question opened a new chapter I was eager to write. As the music swelled and volunteers danced around us, I realized that the true test of leadership wasn't the ability to prove oneself once, but the capacity to adapt, grow, and inspire others over and over again. Turning to him, I described my plans for sustainable community hubs, micro-grants for emerging nonprofits, and a mentorship program linking professional volunteers with neighborhood youth. His nod was steady and approving. In that exchange, I felt the full weight and exhilaration of stepping onto the larger stage I'd once only dared to imagine.